First of all, thank you everybody for coming to this one. Being one of the last session, the last day, and but I really appreciate you being here. I've reconnected with some people that I met at a previous presentation in Florida. And again, the dialogue really is where it comes together. So, to go over the topic today, community collaboration, the best and the worst of times, experiences of career counselor that I identify as before and after Pulse. So let's introduce the focus, kind of define some terms very briefly. So how do we define community? We say community a lot, and in all of our practices, the ways we do things. For the purposes of today, this was one thing I put together that might easily explain it for you, is how education, K through 12, also higher education, the government, local, state, national, law enforcement, community relations, then also arrest and rehabilitation, nonprofits, religion and faith, and private sector. And on purpose, we have counseling community there in the middle because, what's been reinforced the more I talk to people from different backgrounds is how much we really do play a pivotal central role with a lot of these agencies. So the second focus for today is the best and the worst of times, before and after a crisis. I'm going to touch briefly on the events at Pulse, but what I really want to do today is look at what can we do as a community within those organizations, within counseling, to prevent crisis and tragedy from ever happening, and also after it happens, what can we do to help people? Finally, everything I'm going to talk about is going to have a shadow of career counseling. As we were talking about previously, when I went through my experiences with counseling, I fell in love with career. I'm a career guy. It's what I do. So, first, tie it back to LGBT. Back home, I have a private practice, Chad Brown Career Counseling, and one of the organizations that I participate in is the local Chamber of Commerce for LGBT. One thing to point out with this is that we were talking previously, I'm very fortunate in Orlando that we have a very positive, supportive community. We have Disney Gay Days and Pride and these things. But back to this title, MBA Orlando, the Metropolitan Business Association. When they were formed in the early 90s, they took that title because they were scared. They could not say we are LGBT. When they had a Pride March in '93 in Orlando, there were members of the Ku Klux Klan protesting. Nowadays in Orlando, it's obviously a very different place. It's much more supportive. We're making moves in the right direction. Real quick to point out, what makes this Chamber of Commerce, this organization different. I'll point out some of the things on the principles really quick for you. Encouraging fellowship and support among businesses, professionals, individuals, charities, and LGBT and the allied communities. Fostering communication, acceptance, mutual support among LGBT and allied. So that's why I'm in love with this organization and the way that we're doing things, because we're bringing together that entire community like we talked about, LGBT, but also as I am, an ally, to really come together and make things happen. One thing to point out, I was honored to be New Business of the Year 2016. And also what I'm much more proud of is that on Wednesday night, before I flew here on Thursday, we were awarded LGBT Chamber of the entire nation, over 45 chambers in different states. So a great organization that I'm proud to be a part of. Another connection to LGBT, I have an assistant in the first picture, the Disney picture on the left. Both of their names are Alex, but that Alex grew up in the same neighborhood I did, 6 houses away. She's 20 years old, I'm 32. We're both millennials. But it's very important, and I love having that diversity of the early and the late within a generation. I would also, on a side note, say this is something we need to do within every generation. Sometimes we very much kind of just put everybody within baby boomer, Generation X, millennial. So we obviously have a lot of other identities other than age, but even starting with age, I've seen the world in many different ways than Alex has by being a decade older than her. So, to touch on Pulse, my intention today is to remember those that we lost, continuing to defy terror, but more importantly, the biggest thing is learning and serving from that. There's a time and a place for memorials. That was the large memorial we had, and we're going to go back. I'll be there on Monday at another memorial. But the official hashtag and really the actions that we're experiencing, I would say, in Orlando right now, is how to honor them with action. What are we going to do to learn from those experiences, help those people after crisis, and to come together as a community? Some lessons learned specifically from counseling post-Pulse. From the helper community, we love to help. We always want to rush to the scenes and help people. We had, I think it was over 4,000 counselors sign up, and we used a shared spreadsheet to try to organize this. We had people flying in to offer counseling support. What we needed to figure out first, though, was that the majority of them needed a Spanish speaker. So that right there is a criteria that we had not in Central Florida. You know, we have a ton of Spanish-speaking clients and also counselors. We didn't have the organization set up right there when crisis makes you have quick decisions and to be able to do that. Something else that concerned me to point out for crisis response is when I showed up and I volunteered like all the other counselors, I told them, I said, I'm a career counselor, I'm going to be honest, and I can be present with people. I've worked in crisis, I've been around Baker acting and these things, but I'm a career counselor, excuse me. I know there's brilliant crisis counselors in my community. There's trauma-informed counselors, there's EMDR, those things. But something else that we needed to look at there was the continuum of care, right? What does each individual client need? What kind of counselor, what services? How did they experience this? What's going on? And to think very intentionally. The second point that probably everybody in here is familiar with is that we rushed to the front lines to help people, but they weren't there. When people experience extreme trauma and crisis, most of them shut in and avoid being around people and all these things. I showed up to one church and I walked in and there was a group and I thought, man, this is going to be tough if I'm the only counselor. We were all counselors. Yeah. There were no clients. There's nobody there was wanting our services. You know, it was less than a week after. So just on a point, what we did there is we went down and passed out literature at one of the memorials, anti-suicide, to try to meet them where they are. But again, that's the spirit of today in this presentation. Finally, everyone has very different, unique needs, and that's something I already touched on to some extent. And what's very interesting and very empowering and hopeful for us, especially in Central Florida, is that we saw some institutions come out of areas where they were not as supportive of LGBT, specifically churches. And to speak to it, I'm an ally, so I don't, I can't really talk from the LGBT standpoint, but I felt like, for a large point, there was we will not hate LGBT, we will put up with LGBT. We will allow it to be in our community. What we saw after Pulse with those organizations was full embracing, saying, come to our churches. We want to have a positive communication about what we've been doing wrong. And it was very moving to see not just the people coming to memorials, but also these institutions that may not have been supportive of LGBT in the past, and unfortunately maybe it takes a crisis for that kind of thing to happen, but we did make some progress. The current counseling needs for those impacted, again, like I told you, a lot of those people never even started with counseling. It hasn't even been a year as of today. So getting them to start the process and at the same time revisiting sources of help that somebody may have gone to as an emergency counselor right after it happened, and then now there's all kinds of things that are bringing this back with PTSD and other things. And finally, kind of to my point, and as I said, career is always going to be a part of what I say, processing the trauma first, getting some form of stabilization, and then what I would advocate for, and I'm going to help out with a lot, is how do we get people on this new version of life? It's not back on the regular life. Life will never be the same, but life has to move on. So introducing you to myself a little bit deeper, like I've already mentioned, why I think the way I do and I communicate the way I do. I'll tell you from high school first. I'm a millennial. I was the generation of standardized testing. Curious to see how this might affect everybody from different states, but in Florida, very, very big. FCAT to now Common Core. My experience in high school was never career. It was always study to regurgitate the information, pass the test. And that's concerning from a young person standpoint, But what I also remember is seeing the energy and the excitement from the teacher becoming lost. And that we were all basically locked into this process of having to pass the standardized test, and the community wasn't operating the right way. And just to put, to engage that even more, once you pass the Common Core test to get out of high school, then we have to pass another test, SAT, ACT, to head straight to college. My experience there, and hopefully it's different in other high schools, was testing, guidance counselor will help you figure out how to do the test, how to pass the test. There was no career assessments, there wasn't even a conversation about career. So I went to the local large college, like a lot of people do. University of Central Florida, if you're not familiar, is second largest in the nation, over 50,000 students, great research college, but the experience that I had, and that a lot of people have, my clients currently, is auditorium-style classrooms. You pass the test to do these online classes. And at that point, I didn't know myself. I was starting to get to know myself a little bit. I knew I was a helper. I knew I wanted to help my community. So I got my bachelor's in public administration, figured working for the government's the way to do that. Like I said, didn't know myself, maybe also know reality in the community in some ways. And not that we weren't doing good work there, but to point out what I learned about myself, and I think people would with career counseling, is that we're direct helpers. We were talking about this before we started today. I'm not an administrator at this point in my life, maybe later. To point out a college career center study done by ATD, Association of Talent Development. They surveyed more than 4,000 students, went to 700 universities, and they found that everybody thinks this needs to happen on college campuses. We need a career center. We need to be there for people. But what we've also seen is that nearly half of those people don't ever walk through the door. I met with UCF. They've got over 60,000 students and 6 career counselors. So, we have to figure out a way to collaborate. I would argue there's room for private practice to help with these things too. 57% say that when they do walk in that door, they really didn't help me figure anything out. I would argue in my experience, those of my clients, a lot of times, what class do I need to register for, right? Give me a degree on it, figure those things out. So I continued through immediately after to get my MBA, and I put this kind of the immediate graduate degree due to struggles of undergraduate education. I see this every day with so many of my clients, and it works very positively, like it did for me sometimes, but also we are spending a lot of time and energy and money trying to figure this out sometimes. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to travel for 7 years, do all kinds of great work. I was miserable. It wasn't what I wanted to do. Also to point out how, we were talking about young people and millennials, and this unemployment rate, I hope you can see it, but I'm graduating with an MBA at the height of the Great Recession. People that are 16 to 24 are the blue that are higher. In 2009, the unemployment rate for young people is nearly 20%. So when we look at, and this follows along any time and period, so when we say unemployment is this, we also need to look at how it affects young people. And I'm going to get to why that's very important beyond just getting them jobs. Finally, came back to school, received my master's in mental health counseling from Rollins, fell in love. I was finally in the right place. I say Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The porridge was getting to the right temperature. Public administration, oh no. MBA, there's some parts of this I could use, but it's not really me, and I want to be back home in my local community. Fell in love with counseling. To give you some brief overview of experiences, practicums and internships would be 2013 and 14. Worked with homeless male veterans, career counseling at UCF, seeing this continual trend of people that have been lost in the system and don't know a way out. Finally, where I worked for the longest was about 1.5 years in Florida Department of Juvenile Justice in a program, level 6 program, barbed wire. We talked about relationship with clients and how important that is. I had some aspects of being able to work with them on a very great counseling relationship basis, but I was also required to protective action response and to be able to put my client in an arm bar and to put him on the floor if I need to. It's not a counseling environment. It's not working. But what I'll also say to that point right there, and that we all know, I never felt afraid because my guys knew I cared about them and I knew I took care of them, and the only people they really wanted to lash out at were the people that were abusing them and mistreating them. So stats from the program: about 15 years old when you come in, about 3/4 are African American, and they stay for about 6 to 9 months when they were with us. The reason I had to leave was that recidivism where we were was over 60%, over 50% in the entire state of Florida, and I fear that these stats aren't that different in other states. The biggest thing we needed to do more of here with community collaboration is family therapy and career, getting them excited about when they go home. Instead of, you better report to your juvenile probation officer and finish high school, and if you don't do this, we'll get you again and you'll get locked back up. And it's an us against them mentality. So I started my own practice August 2015, career counseling. I work with 4 main populations: students, high school, college, young professionals, experienced pros, and entrepreneurs. What I'm going to do right now is I'll pass out a sample of what I actually provide all my clients, and I'll keep presenting, but if you'd like to look at it, you can. This is the high school program, and I'll put one back here so you guys can kind of meet in the middle and everybody can have something to look at. So what I just provided you is what every client that comes and sees me receives. And everybody starts with me through brief, solutions-focused career counseling. 3 sessions. We do Myers-Briggs. We do strong interest inventory. We give them something tangible to look at and hold, and we process it with a counselor. My experiences with career counseling traditionally, not the way I'm doing it, in Central Florida, were that it's the norm, unfortunately. So many people I talk to, and even maybe in this room, say it took me a while to figure out who I was and that this is where I should have been. And that's not good for them and also our entire community. Another thing to remark on for just a second is this extreme focus, isolated focus on one criteria to figure out what you should do with your life. So I've seen so much of, I come from a long generation of doctors, of engineers, and it's a good thing. We can consider that as a criteria, but it doesn't mean that's what you have to do for the rest of your life. STEM, now maybe STEAM, because we'll add arts to it. But great things. Look at the trends in our community. Where the job openings going to be? What's going to be high paying? But like I learned from my MBA experience, it's not all about trends. It also has to be who you are. And finally, tied to that is social status. How much money am I going to make? When I was in juvenile justice, by the way, when we touched on career, what I figured out was everybody wanted to be an anesthesiologist. Because they figured out how to sort that salary column. So, hey, if I can't be a professional athlete or a rapper, I want to be an anesthesiologist. So how do we meet in the middle? And the sad thing with everybody that I worked with, especially young people, they don't even know what's available. They have no idea how exciting the world can be to them. Finally, missing the proper balance of relationships, resources, and review. Anybody looking at the folder right now, this is the very first page I give every client. To establish that relationship, get on the same page, and to say, I think resources help us out so much. I love my assessments, but I think they're overly used sometimes. They're abused. To say, Myers-Briggs type, you live your life according to this. It helps us, but we look at the analytical results to see how that falls into play. Relationships, working with your counselor. Most importantly is the review. Is what does the client, when they're looking at those materials, think about? And that should be guiding our progress as we work together. 2 guarantees that I include with my company. Affordable and accessible career counseling is what I think we really need in our community. Definitely in Central Florida, I'd argue all across the nation. The program is always priced at less than the cost of a single college course. What that means is that in the state of Florida, probably in many states, the cost of higher education is just rising and rising. People that don't really know what they need to do, people that go and get a bachelor's degree and then an MBA and then a second master's degree, are spending tons of time and energy and money figuring this out. So you should always, in my opinion, be able to have a general idea of what you want to do with your life for less than the cost of a college course. Another guarantee that we provide all of our clients is that at least 5% will always go back to help our community. Financial donations, volunteering our time and our services, grant writing through collaboration. And why I point this out is not about me, is that this is where that community collaboration comes back into play. Where we have great nonprofits that are doing some things, but they don't know it, they can't do career counseling, and then it would benefit their clients so much. We have other places where we need collaboration and partnership, where then we can really help our clients to a greater level than maybe never thought was possible before. To point out a quick example, some people from Florida may be aware of Equality Florida, one of our community partners that we work with. Very interesting organization, actually consists of two pieces. They are an educational charity, Equality Florida Institute, and an advocacy organization for LGBT through Equality Florida Action. What I want to point out and why this applies to here and why we should always support them, here's what they're working on. We need local LGBT protections, we need a statewide non-discrimination law, we need anti-bullying, and passing legislation specifically to protect our transgender community. This is their homepage, took this picture yesterday. Again, the feeling in Orlando, just for myself, I won't speak for a whole city and everybody in it, but it's honor them with action. As we come up on the 1 year, what are we learning from this? What are we going to do? What are we going to do to serve those people that we lost? One thing I want to point out that's really interesting, the middle point you'll see there is, the big memorial we're going to have around Lake Eola. What they've done is they've gotten 59 organizations to sign up. We are bringing that community together. Not just LGBT. They're bringing together Muslims, Latinx, Christian. And so to my point earlier about bringing in the churches and other organizations, how can we really come together, in addition to having a memorial, and to say, how can we serve our community in a bigger way moving forward? So revisiting this graphic, and how the entire community affects, one thing I want to add to this is social media, immediate, high definition, anything and everything. It's so great to have technology. I think we're going to be able to accomplish so many things with technology and reaching across borders to help people. But a point here was that the community was not informed until the night of they released the body cam footage from all the police in the Pulse nightclub. Our media, which we have a love-hate relationship with, right? Local 6 News, at 5 o'clock, tune in. They include the screaming. They include gunshots. They include, this is crime on local TV, right? So immediately after that, we had a surge of people who had to try to get counseling, who had been, PTSD triggered, excuse the term. But, that's where, again, community collaboration. We need to get on the same page. Because as much as media may act like and maybe really want to help, they were really underserving and damaging our community when they did that day. Revisiting the cost of inadequate career counseling and community collaboration. First one, I hope everybody can see this, is time, money, energy. This is where I feel like a lot of us have experienced. This is where I definitely was. The concern is as we go deeper down this path into substance abuse, unemployment, homelessness, and then finally into criminal activity and gangs, what I saw a lot in juvenile justice. So another graphic pointing this out to also see that criminal activity and gangs starting to adapt an antisocial lifestyle. My community doesn't take care of me, I'm not going to get a good job, it's us against them. What I want to spend the remainder of our time today briefly talking about is when people go down the darkest of paths, when we have the loss of life, the I don't give a anymore moment. Pair that with emotional reactivity and easy access to firearms and finding comfort in extreme ideologies, like I said before, that us against them mentality. So whether it's gang and juvenile justice here, or perhaps also terrorism across the world. Case example of AT, one of my clients, never really paid attention in the groups. I knew I wasn't really probably getting through to him. He would call his mom and say, get that shoebox under the bed so you can feed our kids and you can turn the lights on. Community's not working there the right way. Something's not for that to be the process. This was one of the cases that led me to leave juvenile justice. Less than 2 weeks after he got out, he shot 2 kids, got charged with attempted murder as a minor, and will be spending probably the rest of his life in prison. He has a child. So this again is where the cycle is repeating. What can we do as a community to come together to prevent this from happening? Cost of inadequate career counseling again. Just on June 5th, we had a workplace shooting you may have heard of. Somebody was fired in April, they were returned in June, murdered 5 people and themselves. What I want to point out today here, again, with honoring with action, what can we learn? Here's a quote from the news from one of the neighbors. We see this all too often in news stories after crisis happens. There was something wrong with this person. They were always angry. They went to buy a lot of firearms and ammo and body armor. What can we do in this case to help out? I don't blame anybody, the neighbor, but what can we do as a community? An article that came out, Associated Press, talking about this, called for interdisciplinary threat assessment teams. But what troubles me about this is they say company managers should be on the team and law enforcement. No mention of counseling. No mention of referrals of how to prevent that person. What I want to touch on today, really briefly, is we've looked at gangs and locally and juvenile justice. I think a lot of the same symptomology, a lot of the same environment is happening overseas and causing problems there as well. What I'm going to point out first, make sure everybody can see it. Anything I'm about to say is not meant to provoke any controversy, perceive blame to anybody, but intending to reflect and learn from tragedies so we can find a more positive, sustainable future for my life and future lifetimes. So again, the attack that happened on London Bridge, 2 attackers were previously reported by their neighbors. The other was detained in Italy, getting on a plane to Syria, and actually told his people who detained him, I want to go be a terrorist. They found they did not have enough to charge these people with a real crime, so they had to release them, but they passed along intelligence because they knew that one of them always went to London. One of the mothers of one of these terrorists, he would show me videos of Syria. He wanted to find pure Islam. Again, this is not about religion. This is about people looking somewhere because they're not finding what they need back home. I always told him there were terrible things there that they did not show you. But unfortunately, I was not able to change his mind. My concern is that everybody is too siloed right now. We don't have enough access to these resources to help each other. Interesting study to point out, they did 60 children who were abducted by rebels in Uganda and birth. One of the children said, I love this man because he wakes me up and he gives me food. So a predatory gang environment where if we're not providing people with what they need in their communities, they're going to have to look elsewhere. And sometimes those sources of help are not going to be the best. Another point, these individuals said, we have no other way of life anymore. If we go back to our communities, we've been with the rebels, we've been with the community they don't want us to be with, we'll never be accepted back into society. So we're looking internationally, but come back to juvenile justice, come back to your local communities. I think the theme applies. Interesting thing to end on here is this idea of de-radicalization as an option. They interviewed Daniel Kohler, the Frontline. He has worked for years and years in Germany trying to curb neo-Nazis and right-wing extremism. And some quotes from him in his article, and what they're trying to do is saying we need to talk about why people have been attracted to extremist movements in the very first place. I think what needs to be said is that these de-radicalization programs should not work around or above the heads of their community leaders, organizations, families, religious leaders. Include them, honor them as people, have real collaborative community conversations. What I found fascinating about this article is it sounds a little bit like counseling. They're teaching life skills for economic reintegration, might call that career counseling, family counseling, therapy, psychological mentoring. These candidates have thought about changing. They're in the contemplation stage, but they don't know any way. They don't know how to do this. There's hardly anything more credible to youngsters who are at risk of radicalization than a former member. We need to utilize this. That quote is applied directly to gangs that I've experienced and everywhere where we have these negative peer groups. Final thing that's really interesting is they've opened out, here's a operating rehab center for de-radicalization in Saudi Arabia. This is where we try to steer them away from their deviant path so they no longer present a danger to our society. But here's a quote from one of the clients that are there right now. By the way, you'll see above there, they mentioned Guantanamo Bay. Many of the clients that are in this facility were shipped from Guantanamo Bay back into Saudi custody, out of U.S. custody as part of their release. They say the same thing that we've heard in Uganda, that hey, I might want to try to change, but because I said something, because I went down this path, I have no other way now. So, ending on a positive note, what are my hopes? What do I think we can accomplish together? First thing I think is so important is reducing the stigma of mental health and also the reactionary nature of waiting for crisis to happen and then call in the counselors. It's a great, we do great work in those environments, and we will. But what can we do again before? What can we do to honor people to prevent this from happening? And part of that, I think, is providing our counseling community, no matter where you live, no matter what you do in counseling, but giving us a seat at the table before, during, and after crisis happens. Right now, I feel like it's probably a lot of during, hey, we need counselors right now, and help them figure it out afterwards. But I'll speak to locally and myself, we probably don't do enough before things happen. And finally, the belief I have is that everybody should have access to affordable, accessible career counseling and vocational training. I think if we did a lot better with this area, hopefully, maybe I'm idealistic, but we could prevent a lot of problems from happening in our community. So thank you very much, everybody. Like I said, I intentionally went through that to leave time, because I feel free to ask questions. Let's stimulate some conversation with the grant writing, and also getting that place, that community place at the table. If we do a better job of showing people the pains and the cost to our community, they don't get career counseling, such as homelessness, maybe even shootings and all these things, then I think we all of a sudden become a lot more important to them. A presentation I saw prior to this one in this room, talking about the heartstrings versus the purse strings. And I think that goes right back to what you're saying, is who's my audience? If I go up to Tallahassee, my experience in public administration again, start off with a heartstring to get them interested, but it's not a counseling community where we can maybe use more of that.
Is a large percentage of your clientele LGBT, or is it mixed, or is it?
It's mixed, yeah. It's not specifically LGBT. What I'll say, and I think it's really important, is that anybody that I interact with in the community who is LGBT knows that it's a safe space. So even though I may not market directly to them and it's all LGBT, they know if they come see Chad Brown, everything I just showed you, it's truly a safe space. And that's probably an important point to think about for a second. More than just taking the 1 hour class, 3 hour class, and putting a sticker on my window, is back to authenticity. Who are you really, and how do they really trust you beyond that?
Like getting activity and stuff like that, and seeing classmates get drawn to that.
Yep.
And I understand why.
Yeah. And I'm happy you brought up the gang side of it and stuff, and that I realize, due to multicultural classes and many things, but how privileged I am, right? And that, through race and somewhat socioeconomic and many other factors. But back to this point, if we're going to run everybody in a state through a standardized testing process, from my experience, they're not all at the same level of resources. They're not. It really nurtures an environment where it's not equitable, and creates a lot of problems, I feel like, in our community.
A very accurate statement.
And we all know people too, and maybe I'm one of them, but who struggled through school, who weren't that good in it. I'll be honest, we'll be recorded. But I took Algebra 2 twice in high school. When I got to UCF, I think I got a C- or even a D in biology. It's not who I am. Look at my strong assessment result. They're my lowest results. When I got into counseling, oh my God, yeah, it gets, this is the breakthrough we have to make, right? Get in an educational standpoint, and it no longer seems like you're going to school, right? This textbook seems really cool. I actually want to read an extra chapter. Versus that other model, really the mainstream model of, you got to go to school, you got to do this, you got to push yourself through school, and get to the other side and see what happens. Versus kind of getting them really authentically engaged and, and in tune. A good question.
Because, and this, I mean the counseling, the broader counseling community, because I honestly think that you're onto something. And I think that there's power in what you say, but really, that's been the inference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think the model, what's really important to me, is that, and kind of coming from the public sector, then to private, and then to counseling, is that we need to get all those communities collaborating and talking together. So, I mean, first of all, what I'm working with on at home a lot is, people that don't do career counseling, that are brilliant in other areas of counseling, let's work together. I got brief solutions focused career counseling. You help them, and by the way, when I send them back to you, they're going to have personality results and all these other things that you can maybe incorporate into couples counseling, all kinds of issues. But to your point, I think the model would need to include, start out with a great foundation of the counseling community, how we can work together better. But then we have to go further. We have to go outside of our community into, like I said, and I don't think that's that hard. Because like I said, we're already interacting with most of those communities. Law enforcement, nonprofits, government, but how do we do that, maybe to your point, in a more organized, efficient way so we can really see some progress?
Whereas if we have a girl in our program who really doesn't seem like college is the right fit for her, but we can funnel her into a great professional career, we consider that a success.
It is.
But the people that give us money don't necessarily consider that a success. I guess it's just a general.
Well, and you bring up a great point, and that's why I love this dialogue. Is okay, it's not just Orlando, Florida. It's here and there, all across the nation. And to your point, the world of work is changing, right? Maybe the traditional 4-year degree, and maybe we're seeing a resurgence in trades and all this different stuff happening. That back to community collaboration, maybe even the funding, more importantly, we all need to get on the same page, for the benefit of our clients and our communities. So, thank you again, everybody. Appreciate it.